Welcome to Module 5, Perform Fit Gap Analysis. This module is part of the Architect Solutions for Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform learning path. Let's get started. Welcome to the Perform Fit Gap Analysis module. Introduction to Fit Gap Analysis. A fit gap analysis identifies the difference between the known requirements and the proposed or current solution. It shows you the elements that are missing from your solution so you can address it. To accomplish this task, you need to fully understand the requirements and analyze the moving parts of your proposed solution.
Welcome to our Business Application Solution Architect Fit Gap Analysis module. Once we've gathered requirements, it's time to take a step back and evaluate if what we are proposing will fit with the customer needs. Did we leave any gaps to address, and how can we address them? Dynamics and the Power Platform have continuous release cycles, 2 waves per year that give new features and updates ongoing all year long. An iterative approach allows you to ebb and flow with the product changes. As we do this, specifically with first-party apps, we're identifying the gaps in those first-party applications and gives us the opportunity to extend those first-party apps to fill the gaps that we've identified. With the Dynamics 365 applications, this is especially important because the application has so much out-of-the-box capabilities. The fit gaps help with that evaluation. One way to determine quality and feasibility of a requirement is to plug it into your process. Can we build actionable tasks? Can we identify and author test cases? Do these items map back to a feature? Do these map back to a stated business or technical goal? Depending on your project methodology, your requirements might be called a user story, tasks might be assignments or work items, bugs might be called defects, and so on. Not every project is a greenfield project starting from zero. So what happens when you find yourself coming into a project where it's already been running for a while? It's important for us to get up to speed on decisions already made and understand why they were made that way. So many times we find that decisions have been made too hastily or solving a perceived problem without there being any analysis of the root cause. Additionally, you will have influencers that are already established that we have to plan around. If the customer's headquarters are in a rural location, not only might they have network access problems, but you might also encounter slower load times for all aspects of their solutions. Legacy systems may not be replaced, data that's old but important. All of these things that we likely won't have control or even influence over, but that doesn't mean they won't impact our work with our solutions.
How you address the identified gaps will vary for many reasons. Time, budget, and resources are among the most common influences. The following image shows the trade-off triangle. With the triangle, the rule is simple. If one side changes, at least one other side must also change. Scope, resources, schedule. In this module, you will explore the feasibility of requirements, refine requirements from proof of concept insights, perform fit gap analysis, evaluate Dynamics 365 apps to meet requirements, evaluate third-party apps, and use alternative solutions. Next unit, determine feasibility of requirements. Determine feasibility of requirements. Throughout the process of collecting requirements, you should always ensure that requirements are feasible. As you perform the fit gap analysis and a review of each of the requirements, it's a good time to double-check the feasibility. When the information was originally captured, you likely didn't have the benefit of other details that might make a requirement less feasible. Determining that a requirement has feasibility challenges should result in it being re-evaluated with the subject matter experts or possibly deprioritized. Determine if people will use the feature. After becoming acquainted with the users, you should consider whether the requirement will result in the creation of a feature that they'll actually use. For example, the feature might be an automated process that is too automated and results in too much rework for common scenarios. Another scenario could involve a feature that, while it might solve the problem, is solved by an overly complex solution. Assess if the feature is technically feasible. The notion that if you don't ask for something, you won't receive it is true. That idea is true of requirements too. However, users often envision and request elaborate solutions to their challenges. As you examine each requirement, you should assess whether the user's solution request fits with the current technologies that they have available. Additionally, you should evaluate if the solution that you are building is consistent with how their platform is designed to work, or if you are pushing beyond the normal limits to appease your customers' elaborate expectations. For example, if the volume of requests is high, you might run the risk of overrunning the API limits for protecting the platform. Therefore, implementing the solution as planned would not be feasible. Evaluate if the process is feasible or overlooked. As you review the requirements, they might clearly highlight a business process, such as resolving the new cases or a sales process. Having clear insight is excellent for those processes that you need only validate whether they are reasonable and implementable or not. However, you should ensure that you've covered exceptions that regularly occur. Scenarios also happen where 10 requirements didn't individually identify a process, but while you are evaluating them as a whole, a business process unexpectedly becomes more identifiable. Verify if regulatory rules or laws make a requirement not feasible. If you're working in a regulated industry, make sure that you verify requirements with a knowledgeable expert on what is allowed and not allowed. When collecting ideas, it is easy to become enthusiastic about a requirement, only to later realize that the requirement isn't feasible because it conflicts with a regulatory rule or law. As you complete collecting requirements, it is an ideal time to reflect on the full set of requirements and ensure that they are feasible as you work through your fit gap analysis or design the solution from the requirements. Next unit, refine requirements from proof of concept insights. Refine requirements from proof of concept insights. Learn from a proof of concept. Building a proof of concept is simple with Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. Watch the following video and listen as two solution architects discuss what you can learn from a proof of concept.
So hello, this is Julie and I am here with solution architect Scott. And we're going to talk a little bit about learning from a proof of concept and using proof of concepts in our project. So hi Scott, how you doing?
Hey Julie, thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in here. We know with Power Platform and Dynamics apps that building a proof of concept or a prototype is super fast and easy, right? And there are different schools of thoughts of whether or not I'm going to keep it for production use or it's disposable. And that's a whole nother conversation on its own. But let's talk about what we can learn from our proof of concept. So can you recall a time where you made a proof of concept and you found maybe something unexpected that helped move the project along or help you change direction in a project?
Yeah, I think every single proof of concept that I've ever done, I think I've always found it to be very valuable and I've learned an awful lot. So you're talking about unexpected stuff. I think once when I was implementing a proof of concept, it was unexpected that when we showed the client and we ran through with various different users, actually, as it turned out that the requirements gathering exercise that the customer had undertaken had come up with some very complex requirements. And as the proof of concept showed, that those complex requirements obviously had an impact on the complexity of the solution. There's only so much you can do in terms of keeping things simple, given that you've got very, very complex calculations that you need to run. And so the unexpected aspect of the result of that was that in showing users, and this is really important with proof of concepts, I see a lot of people create a proof of concept and sort of sit on it and use it as a sort of internal exercise. But I find proof of concepts hugely beneficial to actually demonstrate to end users, potential stakeholders, and the end users are going to be using the system. And in this particular circumstance, it showed out that actually there is absolutely no need for the solution to do those calculations. And in fact, all of the users had is they had an Excel spreadsheet for doing the pricing rules, and they didn't need some kind of fancy rules engine to do, because actually the rules changed with the wind, and then there was no way that they were going to be able to have a system that kept up with the changing rules that they had. So in that particular case, it was like, well, actually all of these requirements are not requirements. They've been created because of a requirements gathering exercise, but they were sort of never really ratified against the impact that was going to have on the solution. So that was one unexpected item. Another one was where, specifically around integration, I think proof of concepts are great because what they can allow you to do is identify where you maybe don't need an integration. And so by showing an integration between two different systems in a sort of proof of concept way, again, it may turn out that actually this is not going to save any time because this data is never actually used when it goes into that other system. It's been, the requirement for integration is just there because there's some kind of legacy reason why data flows in those two different. So I think, that's what I often find unexpected, is that the requirements exercise that has been held up as this real golden source of the things that you maybe have a quote that you had to produce or a proposal, you quite often find that actually some of those requirements really don't need to implement. And that's a huge win, right?
Well, that sounds like very good justification for using proof of concept in general.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of proof of concepts. And I mean, you mentioned that actually they could end up being used in sort of a longer term. They may actually end up being something that you turn into a working system. But you do have to be careful to set the boundaries of your scope of your proof of concept so that customers don't say, well, you've done it now, so can we go live with that, please? That's
great advice. So thinking about when is the right time to make a proof of concept? Is it pre-sales? Is it during fit gap analysis? Is it design time? Is it once with every iteration? What do you find generally works?
Well, I think this follows on from the comment I just made about the scope, and because there are different types of proof of concepts, and prototype is a word that gets used as well along this in sort of conjunction with proof of concept. But I think that the real fundamental thing here is defining what you are trying to prove, because after all, there's no way that we're going to be able to prove everything. So if you're doing an early proof of concept, so you're looking at the fit of requirements against the Power Platform features that you're proposing to use, then the proof of concept is very good for showing a user how the journey may work for them. So it's basically creating some tangible demonstration of how it may look when they're using it on a day-to-day basis. So the proof of concept is more proving the user journey against the Power Platform features that you'd be using. And quite often you might find that, say, for example, someone doesn't like the fact that they have to flip between two screens, or they might say, well, actually, there's no need for that functionality to be in that particular app. It's something that I only use on my phone. It's for exploring the user journey. So the early proof of concepts are very good for that. Whereas if we're talking about design proof of concept, quite often we'll talk about architectural synthesis, and that is actually being able to say, well, actually, let's synthesize functionality that we're going to be building, but using a very short amount of time, so very quick to demonstrate it. And so in agile world, you talk about technical spikes. It's about keeping things lean, on point about the technical functionality that we're trying to prove. So those are two completely different styles of proof of concepts, and so it's important to establish which one we're doing and for what purposes. I mean, in this low code no code world, the great thing about proof of concept is that the functionality that you're building in there, you don't necessarily need to throw away. There was a day where proof of concepts generally were throwaway. They may be even written in a completely different language and a different platform to the target platform that would be used in production. But now we're sort of blurring those lines around where your proof of concept stops and where your actual build of the final system. So always found that if you put standards in place early on, if you say, okay, like naming conventions for your entities, naming conventions for your fields, certain ways of standardizing the build in your proof of concept, then you might actually find that a lot of that can be reused and sort of springboard you into that the design and build. And certainly I'm a big proponent for saying, how far can we get in the sort of like an 80-20 rule kind of way. How far can we get without building any customizations, without writing a single line of code? How far can we get in that proof of concept such that actually you might find that the users say, well, actually, you know what, that's good enough. We don't need to spend X amount of money making that better based on our original thoughts. We've seen it now, and we think that's good enough for now.
That's great advice, Scott. I really do appreciate your time and your wisdom that we're sharing with our solution architects in training. And thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks, Julie, for having me.
Categorize business requirements and perform gap fit analysis, also known as fit gap analysis. Fit gap analysis is simply a process to help you identify what needs to be done and to help size and prioritize. Some projects and methodologies explicitly perform a fit gap analysis and call out the issues, whereas others accomplish the same results with different steps that might not be called fit gap. In fact, as a solution architect, you'll likely catch yourself performing a fit gap analysis in your head as you mentally evaluate a requirement to determine how you would solve it. Fit gap analysis makes sense when you're starting with some level of existing functionality. For business applications like Dynamics 365, that might have many built-in functionalities. A fit gap analysis is important because whenever a fit occurs, meaning the analysis already solves the requirement, you need to identify it and ensure that it's not recreated by building a custom-developed feature. Additionally, the person who performs the fit gap analysis should have a good understanding of the app's out-of-the-box features. The mechanics of performing the fit gap analysis can vary greatly, from figuring out the solution in your head for a small project to using Microsoft Excel template, or perhaps by using Azure DevOps work items and then capturing the solution online. The tool that you use should help the process and not make it more difficult. The real value is in the output from the analysis. To perform a fit gap analysis, you should look at each requirement or user story and note at least the following factors for each. Severity of the gap or category. It categorizes each item as either being a fit, configured, custom, or other. The exact categories are up to you and your own descriptions. The goal is to broadly examine how many out-of-the-box features you're using versus how much you have to customize. Level of effort. This sizes the amount of work for the item, which could be low, medium, high, or could be a rating between 1 to 10. Some teams use commonly known items like t-shirt sizes or playing cards. The important takeaway for this scenario is to be consistent. Priority. Often, priority comes from the business, but the solution architect frequently needs to have some work prioritized higher to help the architecture foundation be put in place. Implementation notes. This feature describes the work that it takes to close the identified gap and backs up the assumptions that you made in the other fields. For example, add a many-to-one relationship to contact. Might be enough to indicate that it's configure category and that its envision work needs to happen. These notes aren't detailed design specifications, but more like high-level backups for the fit gap analysis results. Next unit. Evaluate Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform apps. Evaluate Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform apps. Not every solution will be built in Dynamics 365 or Power Platform. Watch the following video to listen to experts weighing in on knowing when to use a first-party Dynamics 365 app, such as Dynamics 365 for Sales, Dynamics 365 Customer Service, or Dynamics 365 Field Service.
Hi, this is Julie, and I'm here with Scott. Scott, how's it going?
Hey, Julie, how are you?
I'm doing well. Scott is a well-respected architect here in our community, and I wanted to chat with him about evaluating Dynamics first-party apps and when we might use them. So my first question, Scott, is how do you decide on a Dynamics 365 app as a fit for a solution, or maybe proposing something totally custom Power Platform or some mix of the two?
Well, that's a very good question, Julie. It's actually something that we've only very recently had to get our brain around because, the Power Platform is something that has come upon us gradually over the last couple of years. But the thing I always start with is there any pre-existing form of using Dynamics 365 apps? Because one of the real fundamental things that we have to take into consideration is that if we start on the Power Platform, then at the moment there is no clear path to moving to the Dynamics 365 app. So if we have a deployment just using Power Apps, and suddenly we want to use the Sales app, then actually that's going to be a migration. We're going to have to move our data from one environment to another. So it's really important that we do get this right. But obviously, if you've already got customer using the Sales app or the Service app or the Marketing app, then that is a very good indication that you're going to be starting from the Dynamics 365 environment. That's not necessarily to say that you're going to use those apps and extend those apps, but that is a very important thing, that you're already in the Dynamics 365 space, and you should assume that you're going to carry that on. But ultimately, I think, beyond that, it's about looking at features and look at the cost of the license and the value of that feature that's going to be perceived by the customer. Because the Dynamics 365 apps have got an awful lot of functionality on top of just a Power Platform. But of course, if you find that actually the 90% of that functionality that the customer is not interested in, then it starts to undermine the value that you're going to get from that D365 license over and above just the single app Power Platform license that you may be using otherwise. And so it's not only features that we have today, but also another really important consideration that I always look at with the customer is the roadmap of features, looking at what's coming up down the line in the Dynamics 365 space and what may be interesting them. So, hot topics like AI, machine learning, are there those sort of things that they're going to be wanting to use in their sales cycle, for example? And if that's on the roadmap, then there's a very good reason to say, well, actually, we're going to see value in this app, the sales or the servicing or the marketing app on top of that base platform license.
That's very helpful, Scott. I appreciate that. So if somebody's got, say, a Dynamics app, or somebody's got Power Platform stuff sitting on top of it, and you wind up with this behemoth of a system, how can we determine maybe which work streams we can extract out and make a custom app, maybe a model-driven app, maybe a Canvas app? What can lead us on that path?
This is an opportunity we have now with model-driven apps to really start to create an app that's really tailored for a particular cohort of users. So I think what you're asking is, how do we identify a particular group of users and then say, well, actually, that group of users is going to only need these particular entities, these particular forms, these particular views? Because the great thing about model-driven is it is about like cherry picking particular parts of your app and putting them into that app that you can then share with that group of people. And so what I love about those model-driven apps is they're kind of fluid, because it's not like we're building something specifically for that app. We're going to be building those entities, those forms, those views. And then we're going to say, well, okay, well, there's a particular cohort of users that we don't want to have this hugely complicated sitemap of entities that they're never going to be interested in, because after all, that was often a criticism of systems predating the model-driven app module kind of mechanism. Users would go into their environment and that they would be presented with a sitemap of loads of things, and it may be trimmed based on security roles, but overall you might see a lot of unnecessary fields on forms. So now we have this opportunity to start to cherry pick. I think the key here is that the point I'm trying to make is that model-driven apps don't need to be fixed in stone. They can evolve because you are picking and choosing. Now, on the flip side of that, we have Canvas apps, which are much more single purpose usually. And so it's about understanding, okay, well, the model-driven app is like the framework that people are going to use to access the functionality. And then a Canvas app may be a specific purpose that we maybe want to embed in that model-driven app. Or it may just be something that is a use case that they'd be doing on their phone, like checking somebody into an event or something like that. So the way I approach it is to look at both cohorts of users in terms of the groups of users and the aspects of our app that they're going to be accessing. And so trying to create logical groups of that, but also by looking at where we have single purpose pieces of functionality that we want to expose maybe as a Canvas app versus functionality that we can then just go and embed in our model-driven app just to solve a particular purpose. Underpinning all of this, I think what I always trying to achieve is a group of features in a solution that are not necessarily locked in to be used in a particular app, but so that we can pick and choose those features, those entities, those Canvas apps, and then expose them in a combination of different ways to different groups of users, so that allows us to adapt over time as our cohorts of users change.
That's great, Scott. Thank you.
Connectors and APIs. Connectors allow you to take advantage of Microsoft Power Platform without moving your data. Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate use connectors, which allows you to analyze, act, and automate across data and services. Built-in connectors to more than 275 and growing systems and services gives you the ability to build custom connectors that expands to any system or service that has a REST API. Native Dynamics 365 model-driven apps cannot directly use a connector. However, by embedding a Power Apps Canvas app, which can use connectors, you can use them to help you bring data into Dynamics 365 without data migration. In the following video, two solution architects discuss integration with Dynamics 365 apps and Microsoft Power Platform.
Let's say I'm in an organization and we've got great adoption of Power Platform, and our system is growing and users are identifying more and more needs that they have, but we still have lots and lots of different systems that we are communicating with. I have lots of different integration points. How might I most effectively address something like this?
Integration. It's certainly a huge topic, and it's one of those things that, from a solution architecture perspective, it is by very definition, part of the architecture. You want to get it right from the beginning, because integration is costly to change your approach to down the line. And I think that integration is also always more costly than people maybe think. That there is often this sort of notion of, oh, well, it's just integrating this and it's just bringing that data in. I will always try and just have a sort of an honest and open discussion with customers and users about their requirements that they've listed in terms of integration, and say, okay, how can we phase this integration? How, what is it that is absolutely essential to achieve? That this is mission critical. A user cannot do their job unless this particular piece of integration is working. And then so we start to sort of be able to say, okay, this is the stuff that we need to tackle first. And then you can start to lay that out in a number of different phases, because of course we do know that in all projects you learn as you go. You learn more about the business, you learn more about the types of challenges that the users are trying to deal with. And so by understanding where the priorities lie, that gives you that first way of planning the project. But then over and above that, I'm very focused on modeling integration so that we can get as much an understanding of the integration that is required early on without actually implementing it. I mean, obviously implementing it is going to give you the most understanding, but from a solution architecture perspective, if we can model the different types of data, the different ways in which it's flowing around the system in our proposed solution, so like primary data that has to exist in all the different mapped systems that are going to be linked together, and in that primary data, are there multiple masters? Are we updating that data in multiple different places? Because that's usually a red flag, sort of trying to establish how that's going to work in our user flows. Secondary data that actually doesn't need to exist in any other place other than the system that it's being entered into. And then like reference data, read-only data, stuff that is we don't ever need to update because it's coming from some sort of external single point of source. And then starting to say, well, okay, we've got transactional data versus more data warehouse kind of reporting data. These are all the sort of different types of data that we can start to model. So we kind of getting an understanding about where there needs to be flows between, whether or not it needs to be real time, or it can be more of a sort of an offline or a batch or sequential. And so by performing this model, it allows us to explore those integration requirements and learn a lot more about the challenges and the red flags and the conflicts, like you might find, for example, that actually you've got some data that needs to exist in two different places and be updated in multiple different places, but there's no easy way of mapping them between each other, two different schemas. The example I always give is where you've got an address that's maybe address line 123 in one system, but then in the other system you've got it's just one single free text address. And now if you need to be able to update that address in 2 different places, you got multiple master and sync them together, then obviously that's going to cause a problem, because you can go one way but you can't get back the other way. So the model really starts to understand where the different types of data are flowing around, and then the possible problems, and so you can explore that before you've actually got into that point of actually needing to implement it. And then you can start to look at, okay, well, given these different types of data, how do we best map that onto the functionality that we have in the Power Platform? So, for example, if you've got a Canvas app showing data and it's reference data, it's read-only, you could maybe have a custom connector that you can pull data just in time, as you need it, and filter it. But there are some times actually where you might need to have your data existing inside a model-driven app chart, in which case you're going to need to have it in either synchronized and actually in the CDS data store, or maybe you could use something like virtual entities. So the first port of call is to start to model your data so you really understand it in a conceptual, logical way, and then you can start to map, given the understanding you have of that data and the flow of it, onto the Power Platform features that you may use for that integration.
Great, Scott. Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom. Hopefully, we'll be preparing our solution architects for using first-party apps as appropriate and building custom as appropriate. Thank you.
Industry accelerators. The Open Data Initiative is a jointly developed vision by Microsoft, Adobe, and SAP. The initiative resulted in the Microsoft Common Data Model that is already supported in Microsoft Dataverse, Dynamics 365, Power Apps, Power BI, and upcoming Azure Data Services, which directly accrues value toward the Open Data Initiative. The goal of the Common Data Model is to enable data and application interoperability that spans multiple channels, service implementations, and vendors. The Common Data Model provides self-describing data, structurally and semantically, which enables applications to read and understand the data. The Common Data Model standard defines a common language for business entities that cover, over time, the full range of business processes across sales, services, marketing, operations, finance, talent, and commerce, and for the customer, people, and product entities at the core of a company's business processes. The Common Data Model enables horizontal consistency for customers' business data, helping to simplify their ability to create value from that data. However, many customers and partners want solutions and platforms that are tailored for their industry. Microsoft is working closely with a set of industries to make the Common Data Model more relevant to them through industry accelerators. With the accelerators, you can have a production-ready schema to jumpstart your implementations. The following industries currently have available accelerators: banking, healthcare, education, including higher education and K-12, non-profit, automotive, media. AppSource. With Microsoft AppSource, you could discover apps to add to your business solutions. Get the right app right now. Find top business solutions for your industry from Microsoft and select partners, including exclusive apps. Build on what you have. Add new capabilities to your existing business applications. From Dynamics to Power BI, you'll find solutions to enhance what you already use. Start with confidence. Try any app for free before you buy it. Then work with a trusted Microsoft partner to implement your new solution. With AppSource, you can market your services at scale. Reach 100 million commercial active users. Help business users do more with their existing Microsoft investments. Simplify the discovery, trial, and acquisition of line of business apps and services. Check your knowledge. Answer the following questions to see what you've learned. What is an industry accelerator? A production-ready set of target entity definitions that are available for free from Microsoft, an application that is sold by a third party, a guidebook for users. We'll select the first one. When is the best time to make a proof of concept? We'll say anytime. Which of the following options can help you evaluate requirements in a fit gap analysis? Severity, priority, level of effort, all of the above. Say all of the above. You've now completed this module. Let's have a look at the summary. Summary. We have continued to analyse and learn about our customer and their needs to help make better design decisions. As we prepare for our design phase of a project, it's time to reflect on the information we have so far. Have we acquired enough information to begin the next phase of the project? And if we have not, how can we identify and remedy the gaps? Key points from this module have included determining the feasibility of requirements, evaluating existing first-party apps for use, learning from a proof of concept, using fit gap analysis. From here, as a solution architect, you will continue to participate in several aspects of the design and the execution of the solution. It is important to be able to work as a team, understand project governance, effectively model data and security, and so much more. And that concludes the end of this learning path, Architect Solutions for Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform. And here's the modules we covered. Becoming a Solution Architect for Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform. Discover customer needs as a Solution Architect for Dynamics 365 and Microsoft Power Platform. Propose a solution as a Solution Architect for Microsoft Power Platform and Dynamics 365. Work with requirements for Microsoft Power Platform and Dynamics 365. Perform fit gap analysis. Good luck with your future learning. I hope you found this Audio Learn series useful. If you did, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want to hear more audio learning from Microsoft Learn's learning paths, leave a comment on what you'd like to hear next. Thanks for watching.